Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. As always, if you're enjoying our legal education content, please remember to hit that notification bell so you can get alerts of all of our streams, such as this one. For today's live stream, we are tackling your right to remain silent. In the case of Jen Shah, a real housewife of Salt Lake. She was interviewed by the police, and she would like to move to suppress certain statements she gave to the police. She'd like to argue that her rights were not fully observed, and that the statements that she gave to the police, and presumably things that flow from them, should also be thrown out. Now, this is a great case. This is a great case because you get to play along with me at home. Yes, you. You might say, hey, I never went to law school, but that's okay. I think you can get this one. Really. So we're going to read this one, and we're going to share in this together, and we're going to learn about some wonderful tips about your right to remain silent, and we'll consider the merits of the arguments of why I didn't get what I was due. Okay, let's get started with this. All right. So we want to move to suppress certain statements we gave to the police. We would like to not have that offered against us at trial. Okay. Ms. Shah moves to suppress her March 30th, 2021 post-arrest interrogation statements, or in the alternative, for suppression hearing, on the grounds they were involuntary under the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause, and that her waiver under Miranda was also involuntary. At the time she waived her rights, Ms. Shah was in a very vulnerable emotional state due to a combination of strange phone calls she received in the morning of her arrest and her history with a convicted felon who had victimized her in New York. This caused her will to be overborne easily by Detective Bastos and several affirmative misrepresentations he made in order to secure a waiver of rights. Okay, so let's get this straight. We weren't necessarily in the best psychological condition at the time the police interviewed us. We were somewhat distressed, and we were somewhat not in full control of our emotions, and yeah, this sounds like every police interview ever. Okay. There is no dispute the interrogation was custodial, or that Ms. Shah waived her Miranda rights both orally and in writing. So she waived her Miranda rights orally and in writing. See, I told you could play along at home. I told you you'd be able to get this one right. Let's listen to some facts. On March the 30th of 2021, Ms. Shah was arrested in Salt Lake City, Utah, while on the road to her way to recording an episode of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. What do you mean on your way? Surely they're recording all the times because it's reality, right? Shortly before she was stopped, a person who did not identify himself telephoned her and said that her husband had told this unknown person to call her. The unknown caller told Ms. Shah that she should return home. Ms. Shah immediately tried calling her husband, but did not pick up even after he called twice. Ms. Shah began worrying for him. Why she believes this random person, who can say? Shortly after, Ms. Shah received another call, this time from a 917 number. The caller identified himself as Detective Christopher Bastos of the New York Police Department. Ms. Shah was confused as to why a New York police detective would be calling her, given that she was in Utah at the time. Well, I'm going to take a wild stab at it, and I'm going to guess that the state of New York or its instrumentalities have some questions. Her first thought and apprehension was that this matter was related to a different New York Police Department matter, in which Ms. Shah had been granted a permanent order of protection by a judge in the Supreme Court. And by the way, because New York, that's the trial level court, just remember, The Supreme Court in New York is the trial level court because they have to be different. So read trial level court. Against a man who victimized her. Among other things, this person was convicted, among other things, of felony criminal contempt for an incident in Manhattan in February 2017, in which this individual had stolen from Ms. Shea and later violated temporary order of protection by arresting her, assaulting her in Salt Lake. She wondered if Detective Bastos was calling about that and was, in any event, eager to know the reason for the call. So, yeah, so she's on the way to the taping of The Real Housewives. She receives a call from an unknown number. The husband said, this guy said the husband said to call him. Maybe the husband has a clue the police are looking for her, whoever this unknown guy is. But she's unable to reach her husband. So before that happens, the detective gets a hold of her. And the detective now wants to talk. Okay. Detective Bastos did not tell her why he was calling, but instead told Miss Shah to pull over, and minutes later, he pulled up in a car with other agents. She walked to the back of the car, placed in handcuffs, and told her they had a warrant for her arrest. Miss Shah was at this point incredibly confused and emotionally off balance from the strange series of events and believed she might have been the victim of false identification. She repeatedly asked Detective Bastos for clarification, including, "Am I under arrest?" Yeah. "Am I going to jail?" Yes. Which were phrases she used interchangeably and thought of as the same thing. Detective Bastos never answered either of these questions, but repeatedly just said words to the effect of, "We just want to talk to you, and I promise we just want to talk to you." He also told her more than once, "We just want to make sure that you're okay." Miss Shah was consumed with desire to know why she had been placed in handcuffs and apparently arrested. Unbeknownst to Miss Shah at the time, Detective Bastos knew who Individual 1 was. Although he does not appear to have a criminally charged in this case, Individual 1 is on a government list of people involved in a scheme charged in the indictment. And separately, Detective Bastos and Miss Shah discussed Individual 1 and Individual 1's brother during the interrogation. I don't really care about any of that, about whatever Individual 1 and their interactions with any of that, because at the moment, what we care about is Miss Shah over here, who I keep pronouncing her name differently in the hope that one of them will be correct. This tells you I don't watch The Real Housewives, right? So she is put in handcuffs. She is told she's under arrest. She's asking questions like, "Am I under arrest?" "Yes." "Yes, you are." "Yeah." "Okay." If you have curiosity as to why you're being arrested, you know who could help clarify that question? An attorney. An attorney would be good. The attorney will help you figure out why you've been arrested and the nature of the warrant and so forth and so on. Detective Bastos drove Miss Shea to ICE headquarters. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was available. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. And took her to a break room with a circular table and 3 chairs. He and another agent handcuffed Miss Shea to one of the chairs and then joined her at the table. So now she's in an interview room and she is handcuffed to the table. Also a clue. Detective Bastos read Miss Shah the Miranda warnings from a printed piece of paper. Probably not the first time that she's hearing this, incidentally, but this is very typical. It's not necessarily required, but it's good practice. And the police know it's good practice to get it in writing and to get a signature. It helps. So she probably has gotten Miranda before, and now she is going to be told orally and in writing her Miranda rights again and asked to sign off on them. Okay. All right. She was also handed a copy to sign as she read along, so she has her own copy The detective has a copy. She has a copy. She can hold it right in front of her eyes and read the words as they're being read to her. Good practice from the police. Although she heard the words the detective read, Miss Shah's contact lenses, which were in her eye, were dry, and she did not have her reading glasses. So her vision was blurry, and she was unable to read the paper in front of her. It was my dry contact lenses. So I couldn't read the paper. But yeah, okay, but I can listen, which is also why this is good practice, incidentally. You know, get your bases covered, right? Yeah. Even while being read her rights, Miss Shah did not know what was going on and still thought it might be a potential misidentification. Okay, what is going on right now? Let me clarify. You're under arrest. That's actually literally the very first words in the Miranda warning. You are under arrest. It's the first words in the Miranda warning. You are under arrest. Then it goes on. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you at your own expense. Do you understand? And also, you can discontinue the questioning at any time. Do you understand the rights as I've just read them to you? But literally, the first words are, you are under arrest. But somehow she's confused. Also, she's handcuffed to the table. Also, she was handcuffed and put in the police car. Also, she was told she has an arrest warrant. But she's confused. Okay. She was eager to find out what was going on. What Detective Bastos just wanted to talk to her about and why he wanted to make sure that she was okay. She believed the only way she was finally going to get an answer was to sign the piece of paper and waive her rights. Okay, kids. When the police tell you you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, my recommendation to you is that you should remain silent and ask for an attorney. The attorney will be happy to help clarify these issues for you. Seriously. They will explain it to you in detail too, even more detail than the police will, because the police will say, here's the charge, and then the lawyer will say, okay, here's what that means, and little conversation, little chit chat with you and your lawyer. It's great. It's a great tool for clarification. But she's curious. She wants to know why the police want to talk to her. Curiosity killed the cat, man. How do you think it's going over here? How do you think it's going, Uncivil Law audience, as the judges in this case, since we are all collectively judges together now? How are you feeling about that motion to suppress? How are you feeling about throwing out these statements? Feeling good? Feeling like they should be thrown out? Yeah. Each time Detective Bastos asked if she understood her rights, he told her to initial next to the relevant statement. So every line is initialed and signed. At one point, she signed next to the wrong line because she couldn't see the paper. Detective Bastos, good practice on him, noticed she signed in the wrong place and reread the missed line to make sure she knew what she signed. This is her saying that, by the way. This is her motion. She's saying this happened. This isn't the detective who's saying this happened. She is saying this happened. She is saying she missigned it. She is saying the detective reread the line to make sure she understood it. Okay. After Miss Shea said she understood that she could stop questioning at any time, which is part of the Miranda warning, right? You have the right to stop questioning at any time. It is part of the Miranda warning. For the purpose of consulting an attorney, or just because you feel like it, incidentally. Detective Bastos told her that she's got to sign there, at the bottom of the card. Miss Shah followed her instructions. Okay. She has signed the card. saying she understands her Miranda rights, right? And one of her Miranda rights, and she herself acknowledges this, she says she knew this, is that she has the right to stop questioning at any time. So she can literally sign the Miranda card and say, I have nothing to say to you. Now, personally, I'd recommend not signing the Miranda card. Because why? But you can stop at any time. Anytime. So it's not like, oh, you sign, now you have to keep talking to me. No, they told you. It's part of the warning. You can stop the questioning at any time. Anytime. Anytime. After she signed the waiver, even though she could not read it, but before she began questioning, Miss Shea informed the detective that her contact lenses were blurry. The detective and agent found her solution, uncuffed her, allowed her to fix it, and recuffed her, which is both compassionate and just good practice. Why not? So, she still has the card, so she could read it now. Detective Bastos over here recorded the conversation, but didn't tell Miss Shea he was doing so. Yeah. Not until the very end of the 1 hour, 20-minute interrogation, right after he said, I want to conclude, did Detective Bastos finally tell Miss Shea the truth about what she was being charged with. He doesn't have to tell you what you're being charged with. It's fairly standard practice, but strictly speaking, it's not required. Also, he has an arrest warrant. So it's fairly standard practice for the police to tell you what you've been arrested by, but strictly speaking, it's not required. They just have to tell you that you're under arrest. And you have the right to a lawyer. And you have the right to remain silent. And if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you at the government's expense, and you have the right to discontinue the questioning at any time. Do you understand the rights as I've just read them to you? Notably, the interrogation itself corroborates that the agents had no intention of telling Miss Shea the true and purpose of the interrogation. Ooh, the police, police have different interrogation tactics for different kinds of suspects, and different police officers do things differently. Sometimes they'll tell you, sometimes they'll not. Sometimes they'll withhold, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll try to be your buddy. Sometimes they'll try to yell at you. A little good cop, bad cop, maybe. All kinds of different tactics. All kinds of different tactics. But there is something they have to do. You're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you can, yeah. Under the guise of asking for information about other people he was interested in, which he might very well be interested in them, he sought an admission of knowledge that the entire industry was a fraud. Although it did not work, at no time did Miss Shah admit to committing fraud, as Detective Bastos repeatedly tried to get her to do. He enlisted her apparent knowledge of certain people, companies, government investigations, and the likes, at least some of which the government will seek to offer a trial. At the end of this section, should this motion fail, we intend to move for an in limine to exclude. So we want to suppress, and then we want to move to limit to prevent it from being offered. Sure, that's definitely a thing that's going to happen. Pirlantata asks, a lawyer will be assigned to you. Can you switch the court-appointed lawyer? That is a good question. You can hire your own lawyer at any time, but you can't get a different court-appointed lawyer unless there is some sort of conflict that would prevent that particular lawyer from serving you, which I suppose is possible, if you've had prior legal dealings or, you have prior interactions with them or something. But unless you have a legally cognizable conflict, or he does, or she, as your lawyer might be, then no, you can't choose which court-appointed lawyer you get. You have a right to a lawyer, not a particular lawyer. You can hire your own lawyer at your own expense. So yeah, you can switch from a court-appointed lawyer to your own lawyer if you want. Or pro se, which is not recommended. But yes, that's an option. But once you have a court-appointed lawyer, then you're stuck with them until, the proceedings are over or until they have to leave for other reasons. But yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. Good question. Good question. Although Miss Shea waived her rights, she did not do voluntarily. Okay, so this is the part of the exercise. This is the part of the exercise where we're going to try to claim we were tricked. The police misled us. Okay. She didn't do this voluntarily, but rather as a direct result of law enforcement's deception. It was a deception and trickery calculated to overpower her will. In cases where, as here, the defendant signs an express waiver of Miranda, the question becomes whether the decision was knowing and voluntary. The decision was knowing so long as the defendant understood her rights and the consequences of abandoning them, and as voluntarily so long it was not the product of coercion. The product of coercion. That's a pretty big part there. Okay? So it is not voluntary if it is coerced. But that's not the same thing as being deceived. Coerced is forced, not tricked. Okay? Also, they didn't trick you because they literally hadn't said anything according to you up to that point, other than you're arrested. So there was no trick prior to that. So, A statement is voluntarily unless coercive police conduct overburdens the defendant's will. Courts should evaluate whether police conduct overboard defendants by looking at totality of the circumstances. That's a good thing to do. Let's look at the entire picture. The Supreme Court has held that an affirmative representation, try that again, an affirmative misrepresentation by police can invalidate a waiver of a suspect's Fifth Amendment rights, right? And then it gives the quintessential example. The quintessential example. Misrepresentation. The suspect would lose financial aid for dependent child if they did not cooperate. Yeah, so the police can't be coercive. And there is a line. There is a line. It's pretty hard, but it's possible. And the classic example is they can't threaten to take away your kids. If you don't cooperate, you'll lose custody of your kids. If you don't cooperate right now, we're going to call child services and have them taken away from you. And you'll never see them again. Too much. Too much, says the court. Can't go that far. Right? So no, that won't work. And the other one that, I don't know if it's cited here or not, but the other one is if they manufacture physical evidence. Now, please note what I'm saying carefully. They have to manufacture evidence. So it's not evidence that exists that they lie about, right? Because they can do that. They just can't manufacture evidence. So let's try to give you an example. Let's say they have pictures of the robbery. And let's say we have pictures of the robbery, and they do. And they say, these pictures are of you, which they're not, right? But they have the pictures. Right? But if they show them to you, then that's not going to be helpful. We have you on film, which they don't, right? But the pictures are there. They're not manufactured. They're real. They're just not what they're purporting them to be. They're lying about what they are. As opposed to like a Photoshop picture. If they showed you a Photoshop picture of you robbing the store. You can't manufacture evidence. That's too much. Manufacturing evidence? No. Threatening to take away your children? No. Lying their ass off? Yes, that's fine. Lie like crazy. Jaguar says, can you sign away Miranda if you're under the influence of alcohol, drugs? Great question. There are lots of case law on this. And the answer to the question essentially is yes. You would have to be so intoxicated that you can't consent legally in the same sense of like as to a contract. So you'd have to be pretty far gone. And it's something your lawyer can argue about. Now, the problem also becomes that you voluntarily took the drugs, presumably. And that might be a problem because you might not be able to get past that. So if you voluntarily take the drugs, that could be an issue. So that depends. That's jurisdiction dependent. So there's a jurisdiction dependent issue of, did you take the drugs? Which presumably yes. If so, you might not be able to get past this. And then there is the issue of how far gone are you? If you're merely sloppy, no. You'd have to be so drunk that you can't legally consent, which is pretty hard, actually. Technically, legally, it's pretty hard to be that drunk. But good question. Pierre Lanota says, so fixing the gun used by a McLean woman and then saying she had a working gun, is that manufactured evidence? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's also tampering with evidence. Because in that particular case, right, that's another level too. Because in my hypothetical example with the photoshopped picture, right, it was photoshopped. So it's not real in any sense. But that's even worse because they have a real piece of evidence, the actual gun, that they have changed. So not only is it manufacture of evidence, it's also tampering with evidence, which itself is illegal. Right? Because they have taken the evidence and changed it from the condition in which they found it. That would be what we call tampering. That's a crime. So, yeah, that was a problem. But yes, very, very good question. Very astute observation. My personal favorite example of the signature being valid even though you're drunk or intoxicated, I guess. My personal favorite example of all time, and because it's a nice little statute of frauds case which requires writings. So certain kinds of contract, okay, this is a nice little aside. Certain kinds of contracts have to have a writing. That's a little bit different than the contract being in writing. So it's not that the contract has to be in writing, there has to be evidence in writing that evidences the contract, which is slightly different and material, as we're going to learn rapidly in this example, okay? So my personal favorite example of this, where it was upheld by a court, was there was a guy who wanted to buy another guy's land. I don't know why. I forget. But he really wanted to buy it. A lot. And he asked this guy a lot. And every time the guy said no. Like over and over and over again, he said no. And then one time, apparently, they were at a bar together. And apparently they've been having a few drinks together and said, I'd really like to buy your land. And he apparently said, okay. And so they got out a cocktail napkin and the bar's ballpoint pen and started writing some things. You know, I'm not sure exactly what they wrote, but, you know, land at so-and-so for so value signed. That's a valid contract. Right? That's a valid contract. My personal favorite example of all time. Yeah. The Supreme Court has held that affirmative misrepresentations can invalidate a waiver if they shock the conscience of the court, but it has not yet ruled whether affirmatively misrepresenting the scope of interrogation is grounds to invalidate a waiver. No. The Second Circuit has taken a dim view of affirmative misrepresentations in general. That's nice. Invalidating a Miranda waiver where the arresting officer told the defendant he had to choose between calling an attorney and being cooperative with the government. Now, strictly speaking, he can do either, and that would be, yeah, because you're saying you can't call. You're saying you don't have the right to have an attorney. You do, even if you want to cooperate. So he's invalidating one of your meaningful rights, which is a due process problem, because he's saying you can't hire. Now he's saying you can't get an attorney, which you can. Law enforcement officers concealed the true nature of the purpose will not compel a finding Miranda waiver was involuntarily unless the agents misled the defendant about the true nature of the investigation. Sure. Yeah. In deciding the question of voluntariness, the court should look at characteristics of the accused, conditions of the interrogation, and conduct of law enforcement officers. Yeah, what kind of setting were they in? What kind of time frames are at play? Was anyone threatening anyone physically? Was there like some sort of external problem somewhere maybe? But yeah. With respect to characteristics of the accused, a combination of circumstances unique to Miss Shah weigh in her favor. You know, not for nothing, but it doesn't sound that unique to me. It sounds like a pretty textbook interrogation. First, her experience in the case against individual one, who in 2017 stole from and assaulted Miss Shah while violating a court order, was traumatic. So, your experience 4 years ago operates as a waiver now? He has since been convicted of felonies in New York, and a felony order of protection is in effect until 2026. Miss Shah's lack of sophistication with these matters is shown by the fact that she ultimately conflates in her mind arrest and going to jail. That's not the most unreasonable conflation I've ever heard. There is technically a difference, and you can be under arrest without going to jail. We've seen cases like that. It's usually when the police totally screw up, because they put you in arrest when they're not supposed to. But yeah, technically there's a difference, but it's not the worst conflation I've ever heard in my mind. Additionally, as she offers in her declaration and corroborated by the recording of the interrogation, at the time of the interrogation, she had trouble reading the Miranda because she didn't have her reading glasses and her contact lenses were blurry. At one point causing her to initial the documents in the wrong place. Yes, and that is when the detective noticed and reread the line to make sure that you got it. We are not asserting she did not hear the warnings, but we submit this circumstance as one additional factor in the required assessment of totality of the circumstances. I didn't know Miss Shah was a good comedian. She tells funny jokes. She tells the best jokes. She's the greatest comedian of all time. I'd like my statement suppressed. Woo! That's a good one. The conditions of Miss Shah's interrogation and circumstances leading up to it also make Miss Shah vulnerable to the arresting agent's misrepresentations. She received a strange call from an unknown person telling her that her husband, who she was unable to reach, told them to call and tell her to head home. Probably because the husband's trying to give you a heads up that the police are looking for you. Minutes later, she received a call from a New York police detective who was extremely strange given that she lived in Utah, leading her to think immediately upon the terrifying situation of individual one, who's in jail at this time, I think. Okay. But upon his arrival, Detective Bathos placed her in handcuffs, pointedly did not tell her for what charge, but told her she was under arrest with an arrest warrant, and then misrepresented his intentions, causing her to think it must be a case of mistaken identity. Sure. All these factors came together to put her into a vulnerable emotional state. Oh, Stephanie says her husband is a lawyer. Even better. Even better. Even better. Yeah, that's even better. Probably like, yeah, I'm getting some clues here that maybe, you should call me, honey, because this is about to go bad. If it manifested in her intense desire to find out what this was all about, when she understood it could only happen if she waived her rights. I guess her husband and her may not talk very much about law, in their relationship. I guess that never came up in their courtship and dating. Oh well. Oh well. In terms of the third factor, the conduct of law enforcement, the agent here affirmatively misrepresented the true nature of the investigation, which can serve to invalidate a Miranda waiver. Here, although Detective Bastos identified himself as a police officer and placed Miss Shah in handcuffs, He met her repeated questions about why she is being arrested with affirmative misrepresentations. This is my favorite part. What were these affirmative misrepresentations? Specifically, he said, we just want to talk to you. And I promise we just want to talk to you. Wow. Wow. We just want to talk to you. Well, some attorney somewhere is trying to make the word just do a lot of stuff. Really putting a lot of weight on that word just there. Really trying to squeeze the life out of that word just. It's not that they said we wanted to talk. It's that they said we just wanted to talk. Oh, okay. That's us being misled. Just. Yeah. Both statements were plainly untrue. As well, he knew that he would be taking Miss Shah to a magistrate judge that day based on her being indicted in New York, which may or may not concern him. So from his point of view, we just want to talk to you might be completely correct. The judge, however, might have some other thoughts. To be sure, he desperately did want to talk with her, but he didn't just want to do so. Wow. We're really trying to make the word just do a lot. These misrepresentations were especially coercive in context because they were in response to questions like, am I under arrest? Am I going to jail? I'm pretty sure every cop in the history of time has said we just want to talk. Which at the time they say it may or may not be strictly true, but you know. By telling Miss Shah that his only desire was to talk, Detective Bastos misled her into believing that law enforcement was just trying to clear up an issue, if not trying to help her. As he says, we have an arrest warrant, puts you in handcuffs, and gives you the Miranda warning, the first line of which is, you're under arrest. But I thought they were just trying to help me. Uh-huh. Detective Bastos' further false statement, we just want to make sure you're okay, made matters even worse, not only because it's affirmatively misleading, but because it made her wonder if she was in danger from the violent felon in Detective Bastos' jurisdiction, and led her to believe the police might be there, in fact, to help her. Thus, by the time Miss Shah entered the interrogation room, which was simply the break room of the agent's headquarters, which, you know, fine. I mean, there's like, you know, unless you want to say that the room somehow itself was unduly coercive, which I suppose is possible. So, you know, if they brought you into a room with, you know, lots of weapons around or something, or, you know, lots of policemen staring at you or something. So, unless you want to say that the room is unduly coercive, but it's a break room. So, probably just a little drab. Probably not that coercive. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that that's a problem. She was scared and confused. She was confused about where the police were trying to protect or imprison her, as they say you're under arrest, and scared that individual one might somehow be involved. In light of what Detective Bastos said, that he refused to tell her anything more, which, you know, he doesn't have to. He told you all the mandatory things. Miss Shah believed the only way to find out what was going on was to sign the paperwork in front of her, or get a lawyer. All these factors, their totality, overbore Miss Shah's will. She's got to have the weakest will ever, invalidating her waiver of Miranda rights and rendering her statements involuntary. At minimum, these allegations are sufficient to call the government's tactics into question and require a suppression hearing. No. Hopefully all my fellow uncivilians. untrained or not, also came up with the right answer of no. This is pretty standard behavior from the police. So, yeah. No. We just want to talk. Although motions in limine are premature at this stage, so a motion in limine, just by way of reference, motion in limine, as the name suggests, is a motion to limit. It's a motion to prevent the evidence from coming in or not coming in some part, or preventing them from doing certain things with the evidence, right? It's a motion to limit. And you can use them for all kinds of things. You know? Like, we're only going to show this much of the videotape. We only want this much of the videotape shown. You know, we only want these exhibits in because these are unduly prejudicial. And it's like, okay, so the statement is valid, but we're going to bring a motion in limine. We want you to say the confession is valid, but we also want you to keep it out from the courtroom. Okay, let's give that a shot. It's worth noting if the court denies the present suppression motion, we intend to move at the appropriate time to exclude the entire statement under Federal Rule of Evidence 403, which is the one that says a person's own statements are non-hearsay. Okay. The interrogation that followed the waiver of rights was so misleading, it would confuse the jury and create a substantial danger of unfair prejudice. Oh, I'm sorry. Rule 403. That was my mistake. Yeah, Rule 403 is the one that says it's more prejudicial than probative. Right? So if it's substantially more prejudicial than helpful and revealing, you can keep it out even though it's relevant. So if you have something that would be like horribly misleading, you can keep it out. So we want to say, oh, this statement is so misleading. That's because Detective Bastos did two things during questioning that no reasonable interrogator interested in the truth would have done. What? First, in a case that's principally about knowledge and intent, he elicited many pieces of information about what Ms. Shah knew or had heard about specific people and companies, but let the answer stand without clarifying what exactly she was acknowledging she knew. Her basis of knowledge, the time frame of her knowledge, or whether she knew was rank rumor. What? Second, at several points when, in response to his leading questions about leads and sales, Ms. Shah attempted to give answers that contradicted him or were otherwise exculpatory, Detective Bastos repeatedly changed the subject or cut off Ms. Shah because she could fully do so, which is pretty standard in interrogation tactics. That's pretty standard in interrogation tactics. We provide that preview now as a context of the present motion. Well, let me tell you how that motion in limine is going to go. No. Just no. Just all the no. So, yeah, you want to say the police coerced you, because that's the legal standard, coerced you into giving up your Miranda. And then they tricked you by asking a whole bunch of questions, but they wouldn't tell you why they were asking the questions. And if they got you to admit something that you knew, they didn't go, aha, so you knew it the whole time. They didn't say that. So you didn't know that they knew that you knew, even though you had just said it, because they didn't give you the acknowledgement or something. And yeah. So I don't know what lawyer dreamed this up, because this is no. This would be all the no. All the no. Just all the no. If she had said something like, I want to speak to my husband, because her husband is a lawyer, maybe we could get into an interesting question about whether or not that qualifies as asking for a lawyer or not. That might be fun. right? So if she had during the interview said, I'd like to talk to my husband, and the police said no, because her husband is a lawyer, maybe we could get into whether or not that counts as asking for a lawyer. But unfortunately, she didn't say, I want my husband, so we don't get to ask that fun question. Or if she had said at any point, I want to stop. I don't want to talk to you. I wish to remain silent. I want a lawyer. Go away. But I'm confused. I'm literally handcuffed to the desk, by the way, as I'm making all these statements. The only time I wasn't handcuffed was briefly when I was putting drops in my eyes. But when I was first brought into the room, I was handcuffed to the desk. Then I put drops in my eyes, and then I was re-handcuffed to the desk. And I didn't know what was going on. And I didn't know that I was making statements that incriminated me. Yeah. So, great. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Okay. Was there a question? Let's see if I can screen back up in Melanie. Yeah. Melanie asked, wait, hold up. Kurt, is she trying to claim she believed the only way to figure out what was going on was for her to sign a confession? Well, not sign a confession, but sign away her Miranda rights. So, close enough. Yeah. Close enough. So, yeah. Anyways, that's all for today. If you're liking this stream, please remember to give it a like. And also, please remember to share topics you want to hear about so we can help the channel grow. And give us a sub and all the rest of its stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this. I've been Uncivil Law. I'm going to sign off for now. Until later, my friends. Cheers. Ask for a lawyer. And goodbye.